Ayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam udirayet shrinvatam swakata krishna punyashravana kirtanah hridayanto stihi abhadrani vidunoti sahritsatam nashtaprayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevayam bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki. Okay, so we will begin or we will continue our session from the previous week. We were, I think, quite in the middle of chapter 9, which is the passing away of Bhishmadev. So, first canto, chapter 9, the verse that we had read before, we'll just read it and then we would continue with the discussion from the previous week. There was a focus on a special topic, and the special topic had to do with the general conditions of passing. And we spoke about a few things. Most importantly, we spoke of the fact that the circumstances of birth and the circumstances of death are very distinct, even though we see from an external view that both events seem to be somewhat similar for most people. The experience itself is very distinct. So the passing experience and the coming onto the world experience is very distinct for different individuals, depending on their prowess. We also spoke of the fact that after one comes into being, when one comes into the planet, the next step which the person has to think of is to plan on how to depart. So the condition of departure, the actual condition of departure, is very dependent on how the person lived. So we have a saying that according to how a person lives, that is practically going to set the conditions for departure. The opportunity for us to exist on the planet. Could you put yourself on mute, because I'm hearing some echoing, perhaps because one of you has their microphone on? Okay, let's try again. So the conditions of departure are dependent completely on how we live. We gave the example of a student who is extraordinarily studious and who takes their weekly, the monthly, and the quarterly tests very seriously. They're very, very fixed in terms of their planning during the month. They're very fixed in the planning during the quarter, and then they're taking every test seriously. Now, such a student will have no fear when they have to approach the final test. They would, in fact, be very eager to take the test, because the eagerness itself is to graduate. The eagerness would be for them to see what is beyond, because I have done my part. Now I'm very eager to go beyond, because I'm very eager to see what is beyond. So this eagerness is not so much a matter of being morbid. It is not so much a matter of not being able to be fixed in service, etc. The eagerness is more a matter of having done their part, and then they are waiting to see what is on the other side in terms of how things are, in terms of being able to graduate. Our leaving our bodies, especially for those of us who are practicing Krishna consciousness very seriously, our leaving our bodies is a graduation of sorts. The graduation itself is very, very important, and is also going to be determined by the preparation which one undergoes during their life. So this is also how we explain the quality of fear. If people are afraid of death, it is not so much because there's a lack of understanding. They see people dying all the time. They see people passing away amongst their relatives. You read about it. You see, and sometimes there's a very personal experiences. But even then, there's a certain fear. And this fear itself is because there's a lack of understanding of what lies beyond. And it becomes very, very, I would say, confusing, because the bodily functions stop working properly. So the mental faculties are not properly situated. And in that particular condition, for them to actually visualize something wonderful on the other side is very difficult. So as a consequence, most people have a very, very morbid I would say, view of the final departure from the planet simply because they're not preparing. They just don't have any idea that there is something beyond, and there's no daily preparation. There is no weekly preparation. There isn't a monthly preparation. There isn't an annual preparation. They're not really looking forward to graduating, understanding that there is service beyond, which could potentially be unfettered, uninhibited by this very gross material body. Being freed from material conditioning, one is able to serve wonderfully. And as a consequence, a true servant, someone who has been wanting to serve and who is very eager to render service, is striving very, very hard at all times, trying to make sure that they're able to improve their service quality. For such a servant, the removal of this burden of the gross body and being able to render direct service to the divine couple, having experienced such service whilst being in this body, is something phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Because for them, this is a lifting of the burden. They know that they will be able to do better. They know that 20 years back, their desires were very complicated. 30 years back, the desires were very complicated. Say, for instance, if we find ourselves in a complicated situation, we are unable to execute devotional service, it is because 20 years back, we didn't quite desire devotional service. Since we didn't desire devotional service 20 years back, the present circumstances of life have arranged themselves in such a way that it is complex for us to devote ourselves to devotional service. But now we have an opportunity. Now we have an opportunity for us to be able to desire properly. By desiring properly and then engaging in the sadhana that is required, we are practically engaging in the process of creating a new future. This creation of a new future could happen 10 years hence, 5 years hence, whilst we are in this body, but it requires active desiring. It requires active planning. It requires special focus. Because we should understand that our issue started before the issue actually is happening. In other words, if you're facing challenges today, the challenges did not begin today. They began several years back because there was a certain concentration of desires which were unhealthy. Those unhealthy desires are reaching their fusion. They are practically created circumstances of life that are complex. And those complex circumstances of life do not allow us practically to move forward in devotional service. Many devotees struggle. Now, this is not to say that they're not trying. Many devotees struggle. Some of them are doing very well despite all kinds of challenges. They're using their challenges as fuel for them to be able to climb and to go higher. But in reality, one has to examine life, and we have to understand that we are creating a future, aren't we? Did we not desire to be in a certain place at a certain time? In most cases, we did. In most cases, we did. We either did something which was completely wrong, which has put us in a circumstance which is complex today, or we distinctly desired that we should be in the present circumstances because we were distracted by who we were. We set a goal from the perspective of being a professional. We set a goal from the perspective of being a certain gender, being in a certain body, being in a certain gender, being in a certain part of the world. We set an agenda wanting to improve that lot. So we set agendas which are not distinctly Krishna conscious. We probably succeeded to some extent in achieving the agenda. But in reality, we find that even after achieving the agenda, the prospect of Krishna consciousness is still challenging. The complexity of our life is such that we find the execution of devotional service as challenging. Why is it so? Why should it be that progressively we would find ourselves put into circumstances where the daily grind of life is interfering with our ability to serve? This is very important for us to understand. This is very, very important that we are desiring a future. Now, as we desire a future and as we live the present, we are also creating the future, which includes the leaving of this body. We are practically creating the circumstance of leaving of the body whilst we are in the body at this time. This is being spoken of extensively in this chapter, that we are creating a certain environment. We are creating a certain environment. We are creating certain opportunities. Now, if we look at Srila Bhishma Dev, what is fascinating about Bhishma Dev? He was on the opposite side of Krishna's plan, in one sense. One can make a statement that he was on the opposite side of Krishna's plan. He was on the opposite side. He was opposing Krishna's army. If you consider the Pandavas as being Krishna's servants in Krishna's army, Bhishma Dev was on the opposite side. Yeah. But despite all of that, there was 100% focus in wanting to surrender and wanting to be Krishna's servant. If you could just excuse me for a minute, I'm just going to turn off the fan because it's extraordinarily noisy. I'm not sure it's filtering through to you, but it's really getting to be a disturbance for me. I apologize. Just give me one moment, please. So even though Bhishma Dev was on the opposite side of Krishna's overall army, overall plan, we could see that his alignment of his heart was 100% for Krishna. He was actually serving Krishna on the battlefield. We're going to see this further as we go along in this particular chapter and the verses in the chapter. We're going to see how he is serving Krishna. He is so wonderfully serving Krishna, even he's on the opposite side of Krishna's plan. The point is, what is it which went on in Srila Bhishma Dev's life, and what is it which went on in his heart that Krishna physically presented himself when he was leaving his body? How fascinating is this, that you have all the sages, you have incarnations of Srila Vyasadeva, Parashuram, Lord Parashuram, you have Krishna himself, who is the origin of everyone, and there you have Bhishma Dev lying on the battlefield, which is an extraordinary circumstance, his body completely destroyed. His body completely destroyed. There was no such thing as the senses being active. The body was destroyed. There was great, great pain. What is it which was so wonderful that his desires throughout his life, despite being in so many different stations, despite being in so many different roles over hundreds of years, because he was very old, he belonged to the generation of Arjun's grandfather, even beyond. So he belonged to the generation which was 3 or 4 generations before the Pandavas. The Pandavas themselves were Krishna's age. Krishna was supposed to be 120 years or something, much more older compared to the normal average male or female we find in the present day circumstances. It was many, many years, hundreds of years. His body was hundreds of years. In these hundreds of years, he practically cultivated desires in his heart in such a manner, and he was so singularly focused in tolerating his circumstances of life, but constantly desiring the association of devotees in the Lord, that everybody assembled at the time of death. It is fascinating to see that happen, which is also our goal. Our goal is to be in the company of the devotees. That's the reason why it's extraordinarily important for us to view each other as those amongst whom we could be leaving our bodies. We have to view each other as amongst those with whom we could be leaving our bodies. At some point in the future, they could be around us. The devotees could be chanting Krishna's names, making our journey possible. We have to understand that this is how it works. How it works is for us to constantly desire the company of the devotees and the company of the Lord, to such an extent that the community is available when we are passing all tests. We all pass through different tests. We all pass through different tests in life. Some of these tests from an external observation could be quite challenging, because from an external observation, people would not be seeing us from a successful, I would say, you would not probably be seen as very successful at certain times of your life. You would sometimes be seen as someone who is facing challenges all the time, different ways. The point I'm trying to make is that we are always facing challenges, and sometimes we are always with devotees, and the devotees have different views, but ultimately they are with us and we are with them. Our duty is to foster a community where we have the understanding that this community could be the community that's going to be around us when the final test comes. This is very, very important for us to understand, because that's the arrangement of Krishna. Krishna practically makes this arrangement. Now we see with Bhishma Dev, there must have been some extraordinarily active desiring by Bhishma Dev for him to have the Supreme Lord, for him to have, I would say, the sages for him to have all the sages, the Supreme Lord, for him to have the personalities surround him, there must have been some great desiring. This is the final test. And this requires working on association on a daily and weekly basis. Are we really going through careful assessment of our association? Are we integrating within the community and trying to be of use to the community in certain ways? Are we really putting ourselves in such a position that the community is able to view us as someone who is basically trying and inspiring others? The point which we're trying to make here is that this is our opportunity as well. And this requires active planning. And association is all about being able to understand that the person whom you're talking to could very well be the one sitting next to you chanting Hari Nam when it's time to leave. When the final exam is on, this person could be next to you. He could be chanting or she could be chanting. We have to have this understanding. If we don't have this understanding of the future, then we are operating in a vacuum. And we are operating in a vacuum if you don't have an understanding that you are being tested on a daily basis. You need to be able to wake up and do your bit and to be able to make yourself available on a daily basis. This is preparation for the final exam. And one is preparing this way. There are experiences that occur even before the final exam. The final exam is to have and be in the presence of Krishna. If you've already attained the goals, you would already be in the presence of Krishna even before the final exam. This is basically how it's going to work. There's going to be work that is required on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis. One needs to see how sharp they are. One needs to see if they're preparing well. Because if you're prepared well, then it's a matter of us simply understanding that the transition is into a different area of service. We're simply moving on to a different area of service. This is very important for us. Sort things out in such a way that there are no regrets. And sort things out in such a way that you're desiring the angas of bhakti. Because if you're desiring the angas of bhakti, life will rearrange itself. Please understand, there's great power in the name. There's great power in Krishna's name. There's great power in devotional service. When you're in touch with such great power and you have that desire of wanting to connect more profoundly, your life will rearrange itself. Your life will rearrange itself. We see our body rearranging itself. How many of you, I'm sure many of you have noticed, after coming to Krishna consciousness, your appearance could change because the inner desires change. Desires are changing. Desires are becoming more Krishna conscious. Prasadam is becoming one of the most important aspects of life because we do that a lot during the day. We eat 3 times a day, sometimes more. Prasadam basically goes inside. We desire to eat prasadam, something which has been touched by Krishna. It modifies the physical features. In a similar fashion, you're in touch with very great power. When you're in touch with very great power, watch out for your desires because those desires will manifest. Those desires will manifest. Krishna says in 15:15, he says, I'll help you forget. I'll help you remember. He is going to offer help to forget him. He's going to offer help to remember him as well. So the point we're trying to make is that this is preparation. We have been given all we need. We need to be excited and we need to work on it on a daily basis because this is preparation. For a Krishna conscious person, we are not afraid distinctly of leaving this body. We are not afraid simply because of the fact that leaving this body means service perhaps in less complicated circumstances, provided you're desiring service. That's why desiring the angas of bhakti would mean it would set itself up in such a way that we will have an opportunity for lesser trouble. If you're having trouble today, desiring more service would mean lesser trouble in the future because a life would get arranged. Allow Krishna to rearrange life. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. There's a certain vulnerability in Krishna consciousness because there's a certain vulnerability in surrender. There's a certain vulnerability in surrender. Giving our hand to Krishna is somewhat of a vulnerable situation. We feel vulnerable. We sometimes feel vulnerable that how could I surrender? What if he does this? And what if he takes this away? Or what if he does this to me, which I'm not prepared to do? In reality, it's a vulnerable situation, but that's exactly the characteristic of surrender. The characteristic of surrender is that we give ourselves fully, regardless of how vulnerable and how afraid we are. We give ourselves to Krishna's hands. We tell him, Krishna, rearrange my life. I have tried. My life is too complicated for me to give you 100%. I have tried. I have tried to rearrange, but I can't on my own. So please, Krishna, I need your help. Now, Krishna is going to step in. He's going to rearrange life. He will rearrange life. And when he rearranges life, nothing will interfere. When Krishna, on his own arrangement, gave the kingdom to the Pandavas, it would have never interfered with their bhakti. If the Pandavas had arranged for the kingdom because of their prowess, because of the karma, because of the desires, it would interfere. If Krishna arranges it, it will not interfere. So there's a need for us to desire the future. I'm just wanting to emphasize, because this chapter is about the future. It's not about the passing of Bhishma Dev. It is about his future. It is about how wonderfully, over a 400, 500-year time span, this particular devotee planned his life and executed his life, tolerated the circumstances, eventually to have such an amazing departure on the battlefield. We have our battlefields. Srila Prabhupada writes that the goal of life is to pass away in the battlefield like Bhishma Dev. In fact, Srila Prabhupada was heading to Gitanagari in Pennsylvania, in America. He was heading to Gitanagari, Pennsylvania, where he was wanting to leave his body there. He was wanting to stress that he wanted basically to die on the battlefield. The battlefield for a Krishna conscious devotee is preaching. For us preachers, for us, our movement is about preaching. It is to leave our bodies while we are actively serving Krishna's preaching movement. Srila Prabhupada wanted to die in Gitanagari, but he reached London. When he reached London, at that time there was some recommendation that the further travel could be risky. So he returned back to Vrindavan. So the point which I'm trying to make here is that this was Srila Prabhupada's theme: dying gloriously on the battlefield, dying gloriously, having done his part. He did his best. He tolerated the circumstances. He was an emperor. He was a king. He was the most powerful warrior on the planet. Yet he never directly took on the benefits of power. You see? He was one of the most powerful warriors. It was said that Krishna and Arjuna could not face the battle in front of Bhishma Dev. The assault of Bhishma Dev on Arjuna was so intense one day that Krishna and Arjuna, basically, Krishna had to step in. Arjuna would have died. Arjun would have died because of Bhishma Dev. Krishna practically had to step in. He was the greatest warrior on the planet, on the battlefield. He was very old, but he was so skilled that he was the most powerful warrior. His senses were so strong, nobody could defeat him. So here's a person who was so powerful, who tolerated the circumstances. He had taken some vows. He very steadfastly maintained those vows, wanting to prove the importance of speaking the truth. Because when you break a vow, we are being untruthful. You see? When you break a vow, we are actually lying. Our existence becomes quite problematic, which is the reason why sometimes when devotees ask me, is it important for them to chant qualitatively, or is it important for them to fulfill the quota which they have taken up whilst initiation or during the other ceremonies? I insist on the quota, because if you give the mind power to alter your life based on its own whims and fancies, the mind will take over. So it's very important for us to discipline the mind by refusing to yield and struggling with whatever we have and begging for help and slowly, steadily improving upon the quality of chanting. Don't give up vows that easily, because if you break vows, then the mind will have immense power. If you fast very steadfastly and seriously on Ekadashi, your mind would become very weak. Your mind would become very, very weak in the sense that the mind and the senses would be under your control. If you fast very nicely, the mind and senses would be under your control. They would not overwhelm us. So the point we want to make here is that breaking of vows was not something which was acceptable at all to the generation, because it practically meant that the person lied. And being a liar is very dishonorable. As a consequence, he just tolerated his circumstances. He tolerated his circumstances. He tolerated the entire time period of life, because he was extraordinarily powerful, but yet he subdued himself and then he stayed celibate. He took on the responsibility of family without sex life. He took on the responsibility of raising all these children without the pleasure of sex life. Sex life, the pleasure of sex life, as so-called sex life, is an arrangement of nature where one basically experiences that so-called happiness so that could compensate for the burden that is going to come in terms of family life. It is basically an arrangement of nature. But here he was, where he was completely celibate, but he took on the responsibility of raising all the Pandavas, his grandchildren. He raised the previous generation, Pandu and Dhritarashtra. He raised their father, right? Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. He never had the kingdom to himself. So this was an extraordinary person who practically at every given time was following the principles of Bhagavad Gita. He was following the principles of rendering service, tolerating the circumstances, and being unattached to the results. And here's the outcome. The outcome is being seen that the Lord himself feels compelled to come and stand before him. He says, no, you don't have to really strive. I remember at this time, one of the Matajis who used to serve, I think, in a temple in Croatia. And she was senior devotee. I think she was Prabhupada disciple. And she was a pujari for many, many, many years. Later on, she developed cancer and she was hospitalized. And my spiritual master, His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Maharaj, he was responsible for Croatia. He was the GBC. So when he went to the temple, he missed seeing her, and he found out that she was bedridden and she was with cancer. She was in the hospital. So he went to visit her in the hospital. When he entered into the hospital room, he felt as if he was entering into the temple room. This lady was lying in a bed in the hospital. She was a pujari for many, many years, very sincere pujari. And when he entered into the hospital room, he felt as if he was entering into the temple room. So then he started wanting to ask her how she is. She looked extraordinarily peaceful. She had terminal cancer. She was going to depart. It was just a matter of weeks. She looked extraordinarily peaceful. Devotees, they look very beautiful even when they have been ridden with cancer. They're about to leave. It's quite extraordinary how it's possible that the face, the facial features and everything is so peaceful and very attractive. So my Guru Maharaj asked her as to how she was, and he found it was very peaceful. Then she started talking about how much she missed the service of being a pujari, how much she missed being a pujari. Then she started talking about the fact that every day, as she lies on the bed, she lies on the bed, as she's lying on the bed in the hospital every day, she wakes up and becomes conscious just as she's lying in the bed. She starts thinking about that particular time, what kind of service she should offer to the deities. She would mentally offer all the service to the deities while lying in the hospital bed. While lying in the hospital bed, she would offer service to the deities. She would offer the multiple aratis. She would do a lot of mental seva in terms of actually preparing the different sweets, the Mangalarti sweets, the different kinds of bhoga for the afternoon, different kinds of offering plates, different kinds of arati. All of this was done while she was lying in the hospital bed, struggling with her cancer. And as a consequence, she was so absorbed in her service that she practically transformed the external environment. The external environment, which is normally very dreadful, it's a very heavy tamasic environment in the hospital, was transformed by her internal consciousness into a transcendental atmosphere. It was like entering into a temple room. What goes on in her heart, whatever was going on in her heart, projected itself to the atmosphere. I was just wanting to say how powerful our system is, how powerful connecting to Krishna is, that if one is doing manasa seva, manasika seva is in fact, it is ultimately the deity worship that we do, is to allow us such absorption that we are able to serve the deities with great, great care, even in conditions which are not favorable. So we can lie in bed, we may be unclean, but yet we continue serving the deities. So this pujari, she was so good that her service was so pakka, so good and high standards over so many years, that when she was put in the hospital bed and she had terminal cancer, her meditation on the deities and the dressing up of the deities, preparing of bhoga, offering of arati, was so powerful internally that it started projecting itself into the hospital room. My Guru Maharaj, who is very sensitive, he's a very sensitive person because he's very advanced. As a consequence, you become more sensitive of consciousness. The moment he entered into the hospital room, he felt as if he was entering a temple room. He made this remark. So what is it which is being said here? Is that this absorption in activity on a daily basis, if it is intense, then the absorption of seva towards the end will be intense. There's a necessity for intensity in our seva. Material nature is very, very thick. If you want to penetrate material nature, you have to be intense. You need laser-like focus. You need to be able to focus, and you need to be able to pierce material nature. You need to be intense. You can't be mild. It doesn't mean that we are intense to the point where we disturb others, but intense internally. This intensity has to be there. One has to be somewhat of a tapasvi or a tapasvi, some kind of person who is very, very eager for tapas, of wanting to transform themselves. This internal intensity has to be there. Because when you intensely perform seva, when you intensely associate and wanting to serve, then there's such intensity will continue till the very end. It would go beyond. Because the mind is absorbed, the senses are absorbed. As a consequence, Krishna is present fully. It's very easy to do that if it is done when you're fine. Very difficult to do if it has not been done in life. Because all kinds of priorities would come up at the time of leaving the body. All kinds of priorities. So this was Bhishma Dev. Such a powerful warrior with so many responsibilities, such an extent of sacrifice. And here he was at the time of departure telling us that the final test, how the final test happened, showed us that this was an extraordinarily powerful final test. It was worked out well because the student had practiced throughout life. He had succeeded in the quarterlies, he had succeeded in the annuals, he had succeeded in the 6-monthly tests, and there he was taking the final test. And despite the body being riddled by arrows, he was lying on the battlefield, which was not a wonderful condition. There he was, being able to pass the final test in such glorious way. So let's read the verses so that we can understand what this is. So quickly to summarize so that we don't lose track. The emphasis in the two sessions, the previous and the present session, is that there is a need for daily planning. There is a need for weekly planning. There is a need for monthly planning. If you plan, it means you're intense. If you don't plan, it means that you're just allowing life to take you wherever it takes you. Plan your life, plan your day. When devotees used to serve my spiritual master, some of the servants of my spiritual master who are like 21, 22, they used to get burnt out. They will get burnt out in 2 months or 1 month of service. They would not be able to cope with his schedule. The servants of Srila Prabhupada, Shrutakirti Prabhu, and then the many other servants of Srila Prabhupada, they would burn out very soon. They would just burn out. They couldn't manage to cope with Prabhupada's schedule. Why? Because there was intensity. He was very intense in his execution of service. As a consequence, he always used to be on the move. The servant has to be up before the master. The servant basically is such that he has to be up before the master. It's actually a glorious opportunity to be a servant of such devotees because you learn what is surrender. You can't sleep unless your master has slept. You have to wake up before the master wakes up. The bell can ring anytime, which is how Prabhupada used to operate. He used to have a little bell, just when the servant is ready to have a little nap, the bell would ring. You don't have life, that is surrender. So it's a glorious opportunity to be near Srila Prabhupada or some intense, serious devotee, because when you're around these personalities, then you end up doing things like they do. And as a consequence, you basically have a taste of what it is to be completely absorbed. My spiritual master used to know exactly what he would do every 30 minutes the next day. Every 30 minutes of the following day used to be planned. He will eat once a day. He would sleep for 4 hours. Just one meal a day, not more than one meal. The afternoon meal was quite elaborate. Now, I'm not suggesting that any of us try this. I'm not suggesting that you should eat one meal a day. I'm not suggesting you should only sleep 4 hours. But the point I was just wanting to make is that when you want to succeed, and if you're intense, you do notice certain patterns which are always, these patterns can be noticed in some of these serious devotees. They would manage the day in such a way that they would know exactly how they're going to spend time, because time is precious. They would know exactly what takes away time and what should be minimized and accommodated in such a way, how energy could be conserved, what time to sleep and what time to wake up. Yeah, all of this was very extraordinarily planned. Every half hour, he used to know. He used to have a schedule for every 30 minutes. And the reason is this would allow him to not waste Krishna's time. This is intensity. Now, this intensity allows you to go through life in such a way that the end is already planned, it's taken care of. Krishna would make all kinds of changes and he would make arrangements for that end. This is intensity. So the point is, whatever you desired, whatever I desired 20 years back is manifesting today. And I'm using 20 years as simply an example. You can say 12 years. Normally, Shastra says 12 years. Yeah, 12 years. 12 years, for example, in terms of a major change can occur every 12 years. Major changes can occur 30 years, every 30 years, 18 years. You see? 12 years, 18 years, 30 years. These are all Shastric patterns where changes can occur. So the point being that whatever we desire in the past is manifesting today. Whatever we desire today is going to manifest in the future. If you find that you're not able to give life to the 5 main angas of bhakti fully because life has become complicated, then desire to give life fully to the 5 angas of bhakti. Life will change. If you learn how to create a future, especially because you are in touch with a powerful process, then you should manage that process every day. You should calibrate yourself. You should know where you are, because you are linked to a very powerful process, a very, very powerful group of people. Our parampara is very powerful. They are far, far superior to the demigods. Our parampara is far superior. They are all residents of the spiritual sky. The demigods cooperate fully when the parampara is involved. So don't underestimate the connection that we have with the parampara. So when we are connected with someone so powerful, when you're connected with such a powerful Guru Varga, the branch of Gurus, the parampara, then we have to desire carefully for the future. Because when we start desiring the future, along with in being in touch with the parampara's desires, then what would happen is that a future would be created which would be conducive for devotional service. We may find that our future, we are able to do the 5 angas very nicely. That is the goal of life. So we need to learn to desire properly. So we need to monitor our desires to find out, am I really asking for things that really matter in the long run? Am I trying to create a future which is going to be powerful? Am I getting too caught up with the present to such an extent that I'm losing sight of what is going to work in the future? These are questions that we need to ask. We need to ask ourselves these questions very carefully. So this chapter is about someone who succeeded for hundreds of years with very complex assignments. No one can blame Bhishma Dev as being mild. No one can blame Bhishma Dev as being withdrawn from society. He was very heavily involved in managing a kingdom. What to say of a little job in an organization? He was involved in managing a kingdom. He was involved in managing very, very big false egos. Yeah, there were so many princes, there were so many different personalities with large egos. He was practically in an environment which was not conducive in one sense for devotional service, because everybody thought they were God. Everybody was sitting on a throne, everybody was so powerful. And there he was in the midst of all of that, focusing on Krishna, wanting Krishna to be coming, wanting to come back to Krishna. Very, very intense. And Krishna chose him. Krishna could have easily advised Yudhishthira Maharaj. Srila Vyasadeva could have advised, and both of them did advise Yudhishthira, tried to console him. Yudhishthira was not convinced because Krishna bewildered him. He wanted him to take lessons from Bhishma Dev because Bhishma Dev was of the same nature as Yudhishthira. Bhishma Dev was a Kshatriya. He was very heavily involved with day-to-day management of a large kingdom. He was very, very much involved with the nature of being a Kshatriya, passionate. Someone who was extraordinarily successful despite being in a body which normally would have posed all kinds of challenges. Now he wanted him to learn from a practical standpoint, because reading scripture and then living it requires some practical experience. So for example, we find that scripture advises us to do certain things in terms of grihasthashram. Sometimes if you are not a grihastha, it's difficult to understand a grihasthashram. If you are a grihastha, then you've gone through those complexities. It becomes easier to understand. So in that sense, there's a practical, I would say, experience which Krishna wanted Yudhishthira to learn from. So let's read the verses to conclude this chapter. This is verse 26, which we left in the previous session. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Purushasvabhava vihitan yata varnam yata shramam vairagya ragopadibhyam amnato bayalakshanan. At Maharaj Yudhishthira's inquiry, Bhishma Dev first defined all the classifications of castes and orders of life in terms of the individual's qualifications. Then he systematically, in twofold divisions, described counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. Okay, basically, this is verse 26 of chapter 9. This verse talks about the purpose of Varnashram. Varnashram, specifically ashram, in terms of the different varnas in the ashram, focuses on being able to purify ourselves, because there is a parallel link between Varnashram and the modes of nature. Shudra equates to the mode of ignorance, equates to someone who needs his desires to be fulfilled. They are largely eating, sleeping, mating, defending. That is Shudra. Eating, sleeping, mating. If you disturb the eating, mating, sleeping, defending of a Shudra, then the Shudra becomes motivated to grab power. And if they become motivated to grab power and they become kings, being Shudras, they will create Shudra arrangements for life. The population then becomes Shudra. So today's world, the Shudras not being given enough in terms of eating, mating, sleeping, defending by the previous monarchies and the arrangements of social order, not being given enough, not being satisfied because the kings were corrupt, the Brahmanas were corrupt. As a consequence, the Shudras took over. Today you have a Shudra leadership which is just focused on eating, sleeping, mating, defending. And what are they doing? They think these are the priorities of life, and they are arranging this in plenty for the population. They are arranging this in plenty. They are arranging facilities for further degradation by eating, sleeping, mating, defending for the population. They usurp power. If you don't give proper functions of life, eating, sleeping, mating, defending to the Shudra will take power. Because they don't have it, they don't get what they are getting, so they will take over power. And if they become leadership, because they are Shudras, because they are in the mode of ignorance, they have no vision. Because they lack vision, they would only make arrangements for degradation. So which is the arrangement today? We are practically seeing an arrangement which is very inefficient and which has absolutely no vision for the future, simply because the Shudras have practically taken over. The Shudra has taken over leadership because the Brahmanas were not proper. If the Brahmana had played their role, the higher mode of goodness would have controlled the lower modes. But because the higher mode of goodness, which is the Brahmanas themselves, were corrupt and they allowed themselves to become contaminated, they could not control the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas became extraordinarily weak. The Kshatriyas themselves becoming very weak, then the Vaishyas, the businessmen, they take over, and then the Shudras take over. So today we have a society where the Varnashrama has become completely corrupt simply because of the fact that there has been revolution and there has been this so-called democratic change which has occurred because the monarchies were corrupt. The monarchies became corrupt because the Brahmanas who are advising them became corrupt. Everything starts with the Brahmana. If Brahmanas were proper, and if they were guiding the Kshatriyas, and the Kshatriyas in themselves were controlling the activities of the Vaishyas, then they would have provided for the Shudras, and the Shudras would have been content. The discontentment of the Shudra class has practically allowed a change in leadership. They have taken over leadership. And because they have taken over leadership, now there isn't much of a future because they don't have vision. You can't have vision in the mode of ignorance. You can't have vision in the mode of passion ignorance, which is Vaishyas. You can't have vision in pure passion. Pure passion focuses in the present. Vision is a gift of the mode of goodness. Someone who is in the mode of goodness, who is a Brahmana, has the ability to see the future. They have ability to understand the future. They are meant to be put in the position of being able to offer advice. And if they're pure and they're independent of society, then they have better chances of offering advice. Srila Prabhupada wanted to create a society of Brahmanas. He wanted to create a society of devotees, Brahmanas, who have the ability to guide the rest of society. So it doesn't mean that every devotee who comes into ISKCON is a Brahmana. It doesn't mean that. It simply means that the overarching responsibility of ISKCON is to play the role of a Brahmanical head for society. There could be Shudras in ISKCON, there could be Kshatriyas in ISKCON, there could be Vaishyas in ISKCON, and there are surely Brahmanas in ISKCON. But the overall objective is to be a society which provides leadership. Leadership by wisdom, leadership by being in touch with the absolute truth, Shastra. That's our focus. So it doesn't quite mean that everybody is going to become a Brahmana. It's not possible. We are all going to act according to our nature, and we should encourage our nature. The Brahmana devotee is not superior to the Shudra devotee. The Brahmana devotee is not superior to the Shudra devotee. A devotee who is very humble and who is serving and who is constantly cleaning and who is absorbing himself in all kinds of wonderful service activities in the temple is as much contributing to Krishna consciousness as much as the pujari is. So one can't really claim that there's a differentiation in Krishna's eyes amongst the propensity for his devotees. His devotees can come in different propensities. We have had our own acharyas. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was a Naishtiki Brahmachari. He was completely celibate. His superior, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, his spiritual master, was completely illiterate, but he was surely accepted because he was a Paramahamsa, completely in grasp of the principles of Krishna consciousness, because he was a Premi Bhakta. He was already at the highest levels of Krishna consciousness, even though he didn't know how to read and write. So a great scholar, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, goes on and takes on someone who is not scholarly in one sense, but he's an exalted devotee. Then the next one is Bhakti Vinod Thakur, a Grihastha with more than 10 children. I don't remember if it's 12 or 13, with a big administrative post. So the point we're trying to make is that our own Guru Varga is very diverse. There have been different contributions by different Varnas and different, I would say, ashramas. So this is all because of Mahaprabhu's mercy. Because when Mahaprabhu came, he also made Haridas Thakur the Namacharya. He was a Muslim. He was a Mohammedan. He was a Muslim by birth. He made him the Namacharya. He was basically the Namacharya. He was the inspirer for the chanting of the holy names, the most important function. Ours is a movement of chanting of the holy names, and a former, I would say, someone who is born in a Muslim family has been the inspiration for chanting of the holy names. So Mahaprabhu basically threw away all these unwanted divisions and he brought in more practical aspects of what one should do, so that everybody could participate. So today, no one would say that a Muslim can't come in and become Krishna conscious. Yeah? Someone who's been born into Islam can't come and become Krishna conscious. No. Our Namacharya was a Mohammedan. He was a Mohammedan, and those, 500 years back when it was very strict, he was made the Namacharya because he showed the qualities of being a Namacharya. So we are interested in qualities. Krishna doesn't differentiate what kind of service you do. But what is important for us to understand is that propensities exist. So if we have a propensity for not leading, if we have a propensity for service in such a way that we are able to serve in the temple, we are cleaning, and if we have a propensity for not wanting to take on responsibility, we are comfortable not being an authority, we're comfortable receiving orders, then we should simply accept it. We should say that this is what we are. It doesn't mean it's going to interfere with your Krishna consciousness. It doesn't mean there's going to be an opportunity which is going to be less available. So we should understand that Krishna doesn't discriminate if you have propensities, but there are propensities amongst our devotees to be of a certain nature. There are devotees who carry the Kshatriya nature. They like to be in command. They like to order around people. They like to structure things. They have the capacity for doing all of that, which is fine. We accept it as well. We accept it. There are Brahmanical devotees. These devotees are very interested in pujari service. They're very, very interested in, I would say, performing, giving classes, etc. They have great capacity for worship. They have great capacity for reading Shastra. They're only interested in that kind of service to some extent. Those devotees are also, the point is that they have a lot of opportunity. It doesn't quite mean that one is superior to the other from a Krishna conscious perspective, because everything is Krishna centered and Krishna does not discriminate amongst who is offering him what service. He is looking for, whether it's being done wholeheartedly. But externally, there is Varnashrama. There is a difference. There is a difference. The Shudra externally is wanting to take care of things for the body. They'll be very disturbed psychologically if they don't have enough facilities to take care of the body. A Shudra would be very disturbed if you tell him that you're not going to get your food, you're not going to get your entertainment. Please shut down all the cinema halls, shut down all the video streaming of YouTube. This population would go crazy because it's a Shudra population. The entertainment industry in Hollywood, Bollywood is created for the Shudra population. Why is it being encouraged by the government? Because it keeps the Shudras going. It's encouraged because it keeps the Shudras going. Yeah? It keeps them going. They feel excited to be in touch with that entertainment because that's life they're never going to have. They're never going to have this so-called fantasy life. They have to work very hard. So the cinema halls, the so-called entertainment which is being provided today is all Shudra entertainment. This is very important for them. If you take away this entertainment from the Shudras, they'll go crazy. The government knows that. The government encourages all these activities. The government takes advantage of all of this because the government is also run by Shudras. They know exactly how to control the population. Yeah? Eat, sleep, mate, defend. If you disturb the arrangement for the Shudras, they will raise arms. This is exactly how revolutions have taken place. The Russian Revolution was a Shudra revolution. The French Revolution was a Shudra revolution. Every revolution is a Shudra revolution because the eating, sleeping, mating, defending issue came up and they were not attended to by the Kshatriyas. They were not attended to by the Vaishyas who held back money. They didn't give enough for the population to eat. And the Kshatriyas, being very weak, couldn't control the Vaishyas, the businessmen. The Brahmanas were non-existent because they could not control the Kshatriyas. In reality, the mode of goodness is supposed to control every other mode. But if that becomes weak, it's going to slip into the poor, low modes. So not so surprising. This is the present state. It is a present state. The present state is a Shudra state. So you're basically coming in touch with Shudras because the arrangements are being made for them. This is basically, the entire world is being organized for Shudras. That's exactly what this is. So Kalo Shudra Sambhavaha, whoever is born in this world is a Shudra because the arrangement itself is a Shudra. It's a Shudra arrangement overall. So Bhishma Dev is basically talking about Varna and Ashrama. The real Varna and Ashrama is supposed to allow the Shudra to become a Vaishya in the subsequent lifetime. If the Shudra is properly subservient and he serves and does his part in terms of the Varnashram, then he graduates to become a Vaishya. In the subsequent life, his consciousness shifts in such a way that he is born into the womb of a Vaishya woman. Do you get what I'm saying? You start off as a Shudra. If you're a sincere Shudra, your consciousness changes from mode of ignorance to passion ignorance. Then the next lifetime, because the consciousness has shifted, the opportunity to put that soul is into the womb of a woman who falls in that particular category, a Vaishya woman, someone who is a business class person's wife or family. Then if the Vaishya himself is extraordinarily focused, they get to either graduate to the mode of goodness or they get to graduate to the mode of passion, which is Kshatriya. So if they are focused in doing their duty and they're able to relieve themselves from their consciousness, they graduate their consciousness in the next lifetime, then they get an opportunity for them to enter into the womb of the Kshatriya, I would say, process. So this is Varnashram, where each and every Varna has their duties, and as they have their duties, they perform their duties well, and then you graduate in consciousness, and eventually you are supposed to come to the Brahmanical platform, and while being born in the Brahmanical platform, you are supposed to have opportunities. So a typical Brahmana by birth means the Brahmana by birth is coming into an environment where there's a lot of opportunity for moving forward. But if someone comes into such an environment and behaves like a Shudra, he is a Shudra. This is basically the design of the Varnashram system, is to shift consciousness as people live according to duties. They do their dharma properly in each and every Varna, as mentioned in the Shatras, and then over a period of time, the consciousness shifts, and then they come into higher levels of consciousness. They are born into the wombs of different mothers. Eventually, they become Brahmanical, and then once they are Brahmanical, then their focus becomes completely focused on reading, I would say, and wanting to basically move forward in their consciousness to leave this planet. This is the purpose of Varnashram. So he's talking about that. Basically, he's talking about the roles of kings. So he is talking about the fact that someone starts off as a brahmachari, that brahmachari may not have much to do in terms of attachments. Yeah. Someone is able to detach themselves, they could continue on and become sannyasi. But at brahmacharya is done, one already has good knowledge, but they can't control themselves and they want to engage their senses according to religious principles. They get married. Then they pass through grahastha ashram. So basically, even the varna and the ashram are designed for spiritual aptitude and also for the purpose of giving more spiritual opportunity. The sannyasi has a lot of spiritual opportunity. The grahastha, on the other hand, does not have much spiritual opportunity because the grahastha has to take care of the home. They have to execute their responsibilities at home. As a consequence, they are more in touch with material nature because they have to desire things for the home. We spoke of desiring at the beginning of the class. The grahasthas have to desire things which are not distinctly connected to Krishna consciousness. It's a bit of a challenge. As a consequence, the grahasthas basically have to host sannyasis. They have to host renunciates when they come so that they can gain from the service. They have to give a part of the money which they make so that they are purified from the karma which they execute in the outside world. So you can be detached and you can serve. You can also serve by interaction, by attachment. Both of these can be done. In other words, you're attached, but then you interact dharmically and you're able to relieve yourself of the attachment. 27. Dana dharman, raja dharman, moksha dharman, vibhagashah, stri dharman, bhagavad dharman, samasa vyasa yogataha. He then explained by division acts of charity, the pragmatic activities of a king, and activities for salvation. Then he described the duties of women and devotees, both briefly and extensively. Dharmartha kama moksham cha sahopayan yatamune nanakya netihasheshu varnayamasha tattvavit. Then he described the occupational duties of different orders and statuses of life, citing instances from history, for he was himself well acquainted with the truth. He is now describing the different orders of life. Orders as in, for example, the principle, the orders of the Kshatriyas, the Brahmanas, the different divisions. He also gives elaborate descriptions of Shastra because he's completely well versed in it. 29. Dharmam pravadastasya sakalaha pratyupashitaha yo yoginas chandamatyor vanchitas tutaranayanah. While Bhishma Dev was describing occupational duties, the sun's course ran into the northern hemisphere. This period is desired by mystics who die at their will. So the sun has two 6-month journeys. I'm talking about the Surya Dev. So for first 6 months, he is ascending, and this is called the northern course. During this time, the Devas are awake. It is the day of the Devas. If you die during the day of the Devas, then there's an opportunity for more help, because when we leave our bodies, you need the department heads in the sky to be working. You don't want them to be sleeping. So during the first 6 months, which is northern course, the Devas are active, they are working, they are holding on to their responsibilities. Then there is the southern course of the sun. During the southern course, the Devas are sleeping. As a consequence, there isn't much opportunity, or I would say it is more difficult to get help as we leave the body and go further. So Bhishma Dev was basically waiting for his sun's northern course to begin as well. It doesn't mean devotees are completely dependent on the astrological phenomena of the sun, in Uttarayan, sun in Dakshina Ayan. Ayan means direction. Uttarayan is the northern course are awake. The southern course of the sun is when the Devas are asleep. So basically, yes, was there any point that was being made here? Okay, I was just wanting to see if there was anything. So basically, the devotees are not dependent on the northern or the southern courses. We are not. We are basically dependent on the arrangements of Krishna. So we don't want to worry about the minutiae, these smaller details. We want to focus on the broader details of Panchanga Bhakti, because when we focus on the broader details of Panchanga Bhakti in terms of chanting, in terms of association, in terms of service, reading Srimad Bhagavatam, everything else which the demigods have to do would be arranged quite naturally. So we don't want to get too distracted by the astrological phenomena of trying to leave at a certain time. So we don't want to do that. The point I'm trying to make is if you can do it, it's fine, but don't worry about it. Focus on service. Tadopas samhritya gira sahasranir vimukta sangam mana adi purushe krishne lasat pita pate chaturbuje purastate milita drig vyadarayat. Thereupon, that man who spoke on different subjects with thousands of meanings and who fought on thousands of battlefields and protected thousands of men stopped speaking, and being completely free from all bondage, withdrew his mind from everything else and fixed his wide open eyes upon the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who stood before him four-handed, dressed in yellow garments that glittered and shine. Doing this, being able to withdraw your mind, being able to withdraw your senses, being able to focus at the time of death in front of you, whoever it is in terms of Krishna, being able to focus on Krishna, being able to focus on Krishna's names, this requires practice. As one advances in Krishna consciousness, during higher levels of advancement, the mind will not exist. The mind will not exist. And what do I mean by this? I mean to say that the disturbance caused by the mind, the fluctuation of the mind, the noise of the mind that we keep hearing while we chant, it disappears as one advances. So this is a sign of how advanced Bhishma Dev was. His body was riddled with arrows. He is lying on a bed of arrows. He is lying completely exposed to nature. And in that condition, he is able to withdraw his senses. He is able to withdraw his mind. He is able to focus with wide open eyes on the Supreme Lord. This basically requires practice. This requires accomplishment. As we make advancement in Krishna consciousness, we could experience this as well. The noise of the mind would die down. Your mind will not talk to you. It won't disturb you. Incessantly, it has conversations with us. Those conversations will end. It takes time, but it would. Vishuddhaya dharanaya hatashubhas tad ikshaya vasu gatayudashramaha nivritra sarvendriya vriti vibhamas tustava janyam vishrajan janardanam. By pure meditation, looking at Lord Sri Krishna, he at once was freed from all material inauspiciousness and was relieved of all bodily pains caused by the arrow wounds. Thus, all the external activities of his senses at once stopped, and he prayed transcendentally to the controller of all living beings while quitting his material body. Quite amazing. Sri Bhishmo Vacha Itimatir Upakalpita Vitrishna Bhagavati Satvata Pungave Vivubni Swasukam Upagate Kvachit Vihartum Prakritim Upeyushi Yadbhava Pravaha. Bhishmadev said, let me now invest my thinking, feeling, and willing, which were so long engaged in different subjects and occupational duties, in all-powerful Lord Sri Krishna. He is always self-satisfied, but sometimes being the leader of the devotees, he enjoys transcendental pleasure by descending on the material world, although from him only the material world is created. Tribhuvana Kamanam Tamalavarnam Ravikara Gauravarambaram Dadane Vapur Alaka Kulavratan Vitanan Abjam Vijaya Sakeratir Astume Navadaya. Sri Krishna is the intimate friend of Arjun. He has appeared on this earth in his transcendental body, which resembles the bluish color of the Tamala tree. His body attracts everyone in the three planetary systems, upper, middle, and lower. May his glittering yellow dress and his lotus face covered with paintings of sandalwood pulp be the object of my attraction. May I not desire fruitive results. See, this is a great danger. Bhishmadev is talking about a great danger. This is the last moment of death. At that time, he is basically saying, he is in front of me. I can see this great personality, Krishna. He is wearing this pitambara, yellow garments. He is effulgent. He is beautiful. He has sandalwood pulp decorations on his face. He is so beautiful. He's so attractive. Let me not foolishly desire something fruitive when he is in front of me. This is danger. There's great danger even in that particular moment when Krishna is in front of us. If we don't sort things out properly in terms of us being able to understand the purpose of life while we are living, while we are fit, we could struggle at the time of death where certain desires could come and interfere even when there's an opportunity to come very close to Krishna. So he's talking about the danger. He's saying, let me not desire fruitive desires. Let me not have fruitive desires. You're in front of me. You're so beautiful. You have 4 arms. You have the pitambara. You have this beautiful decoration. You're so attractive. But Krishna, despite all of this, the mind and my being in touch with material nature is so powerful. Let me not desire some nonsense which will not help me. He's very clear. He's also giving us a warning that even after you accomplish everything, you could still very much be bewildered because you're in touch with material nature. You ought to be careful. Yudhi Turaga Raja Vidumra Vishwakacha Lulita Shamavari Alankritasye Mama Nishita Share Vibidyamana Twachi Vilasat Kavache Stu Krishna Atma. On the battlefield where Sri Krishna attended Arjuna out of friendship, the flowing hair of Lord Krishna turned ashen due to the dust raised by the hoofs of the horses. Because of his labor, beads of sweat wetted his face. All these decorations, intensified by the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows, were enjoyed by him. Let my mind thus go to Sri Krishna. What a description. He's talking about Krishna being on the battlefield with hair which is turned colors because of the dust. He is sweating. Krishna is sweating. So there are beads of perspiration on his face. And Bhishmadev has fired arrows upon Krishna. His beautiful bluish body has red welts. He is basically remembering that wondrous, wondrous sight. The Shastra, our Acharyas, they describe that for Krishna, the arrows of Bhishma Dev, which lent such wounds on his body, were the same as a devotee putting flowers on him. In other words, this Bhishma Deva firing arrows is being likened to some other devotee throwing flowers. This is how Krishna took it, because it was like worship. Bhishma Deva worshipped him with arrows. Tapadi Sakivacha Nishamya Madhye Nijaparayor Balayo Ratam Niveshya Stitavati Parasainik Shainikayur Akshnan Kritavati Partha Sakeratir Mamastu. In obedience to the command of his friend Lord Shri Krishna, entered the arena of the battlefield of Kurukshetra between the soldiers of Arjuna and Duryodhana, and while there he shortened the lifespan of the opposite party by his merciful glance. This was done simply by his looking at the enemy. Let my mind be fixed upon that Krishna. So when Arjuna took Krishna and told him, take me to the middle of the battlefield, Krishna glances at the opposite side. All the longevity from the opposite side slips away. They are reduced. Just by Krishna's glance, Krishna desires that his devotee should win. It is over. The lifespan of these warriors on the opposite side is gone. Vyavahita pratnamukam nirikshaya sajanavadad vimukshaya dosha buddhaya kumati maharad atmavidyayas charanaratihi paramasya tasya mestu. When Arjuna was seemingly polluted by ignorance upon observing the soldiers and commanders before him on the battlefield, the Lord eradicated his ignorance by delivering transcendental knowledge. May his lotus feet always remain the object of my attraction. Swanigamam apahaya mat pratigyam vratam adikartum avlupto ratastaha dhatarata charano bhayaschalad harir eva hantum ivam gattotaryaha. Fulfilling my desire and sacrificing his own promise, he got down from the chariot, took up his wheel, and ran towards me hurriedly, just as a lion goes to kill an elephant. He even dropped his outer garment on the way. This is actually quite a fascinating picture. Krishna grabbing a wheel of a chariot, angry, rushing towards Bhishma Dev, wanting to kill him because Bhishma Dev was raining arrows at Arjuna. So Krishna knew that this had to stop. So he practically intervenes, breaking his own promise that he wouldn't interfere in the battle of Kurukshetra. He interferes in the battle of Kurukshetra deliberately at that point in time because he wanted Bhishma Dev to experience that particular wondrous sight. The cowherd boys in Vraja, they fight with Krishna. They all have sticks. They have stick fights. They wrestle. And when they're wrestling and they're fighting with sticks with Krishna and Balaram, in just because they're friends, there is anger. There's irritation. In reality, you can't really fight without a competitive spirit. You can't really fight. You can't really play around with, if you can't really wrestle out of competitive spirit without a little bit of, I would say, intensity, some anger. So the cowherd boys do that. There's great anger, but there's intense love. They love Krishna and Balaram so much. But these sports do occur amongst devotees. Yeah. Hey, the cowherd boys in Vraja, they do fight with Krishna. They have stick fights. It could be in jest, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be less intense. It would be a very serious display of, I want to wrestle you, I want to overpower you. It's done out of love, but at the same time, it doesn't mean it is going to be devoid of the characteristics of such an occurrence. So when the fighting goes on between Krishna and Bhishma Dev, there's great anger which comes out because that is the spirit of a Kshatriya, the competitive spirit of wanting to overpower the enemy. But at the same time, it is also done as an offering of love. Bhishma Dev basically was meditating on that extraordinary picture of Krishna, the most beautiful picture of Krishna just rushing towards him with a chariot wheel which he has picked up just to protect his servant Arjuna. Next verse. May he, Lord Shri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who awards salvation, be my ultimate destination. On the battlefield, he charged me as if angry because of the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows. His shield was scattered. His body was smeared with blood due to the wounds. It's quite a sight, actually. At the moment of death, let my ultimate attraction be to Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. I concentrate my mind upon the chariot driver of Arjuna, who stood with a whip in his right hand and a bridle rope in his left, who was very careful to give protection to Arjuna's chariot by all means. Those who saw him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original forms after death. Those who saw him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original forms. Those who were able to see him in the form of being Arjuna's driver, but also with knowledge of his transcendental nature. Not just seeing him with knowledge of his transcendental nature. They attained their original spiritual forms. Lalita Gati Vilasa, Valguhasa Pranaya Nirikshana, Kalpito Rumanaha, Kritamanu Kritvatya, Unmadandaha, Unmadandaha, Prakriti Magan Kilayasya Gopavadvaha. Let my mind be fixed upon Lord Sri Krishna, whose motions and smiles of love attracted the damsels of Rajadama, the gopis. The damsels imitated the characteristic movements of the Lord after his disappearance from the Rasa dance. Munigana Nripavarya, Sankule Nitam, Sadasi Yudhishthira Rajasuyesham, Arhanam Upapeda, Ikshanayo, Mamadrishi Gochara Esha, Avid Atma. At the Rajasuya of sacrifice performed by Maharaj Yudhishthira, there was the greatest assembly of all the elite men of the world, the royal and the learned orders, and in that great assembly, Lord Sri Krishna was worshipped by one and all as the most exalted personality of Godhead. This happened during my presence, and I remember the incident in order to keep my mind upon the Lord. He is keeping his mind upon the Lord, he is absorbing himself. Tamimam ahamajam sharirabhajam Hridi dishitam atmakalpitanam pratidrisham eva naikadarakam ekam samadhigatosmi viduta veda moha. Now I can meditate with full concentration upon that one Lord Sri Krishna, now present before me, because now I have transcended the misconceptions of duality in regard to his presence in everyone's heart. Even in the hearts of the mental speculators, he is in everyone's heart. The sun may be perceived differently, but the sun is one. Sutau Vacha, Krishna evam Bhagavati, Manovag Drishti Vrittibihi, Atmanam Aveshya so Antasvasaha Upamad. Sutta Goswami said, thus Bhishma Dev merged himself in the super soul, Lord Sri Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead, with his mind, speech, sight, and actions, and thus he became silent and his breathing stopped. Sampadyamanam Ajnaya Bhishmam Brahmani Niskale Sarve Bhabuvastu Tushtinam Bhabuvaste Tushnim Vayam Shiva Dinatyaye. Knowing that Bhishma Dev had merged into the unlimited eternity of the Supreme Absolute, all present there became silent like birds at the end of the day. Tatra Dundibhyo Nedur Devamanavavaditaha Sasamsuhu Sadavo Rajnyam Karpetuhu Pushpavritsayaha. Thereafter, both men and demigods sounded drums in honor, and the honest royal order commenced demonstrations of honor and respect, and from the sky fell showers of flowers. Tasya Nirhara Nadini Samparetasya Bhargava Yudhishthiraha Karayatva Muhurtam Dukhito Bhavat. O descendant of Bhrigu, Shaunaka, after performing funeral rituals for the dead body of Bhishma Dev, Maharaj Yudhishthira was momentarily overtaken with grief. All the great sages then glorified Lord Sri Krishna, who was present there, by confidential Vedic hymns. Then all of them returned to their respective hermitages, bearing always Lord Krishna within their hearts. Thereafter, Maharaj Yudhishthira at once went to his capital, Hastinapur, accompanied by Lord Sri Krishna, and there he consoled his uncle and aunt Gandhari, who was an ascetic. Gandhari, the wife of Dhritarashtra, was a great ascetic. she basically bound her eyes when she found that she had to basically be with a husband who was blind. So she could experience the world as he would. So at any given time, he wouldn't feel that he is inferior to her or dependent on her. So she basically sacrificed her sight voluntarily. She gave up 100 sons, many grandsons, and she was extraordinarily focused on performance of her duties. She was a great personality. Her name is being mentioned here as an ascetic because she is actually being compared to Bhishma Dev in many ways. She was a great worshipper of Lord Shiva, but her qualities were so extraordinary that her sense of duty and her qualities, that she is basically an inspiration to many who talk about chastity. She was a great inspiration for chastity, where she basically understood the duty of a wife. She understood the sensitivity of having a husband who was blind. So she did not want to be seen as superior because she had vision. So she tied her eyes so that she could be blind as well, so that she could be with her husband, so that she would be seen as someone who was on the same platform as her husband. She didn't want to basically insult her husband in any manner. And in this manner, even though she was extraordinarily powerful, she accomplished all her duties in such a wonderful way, but she is considered to be a great, great ascetic, someone with great tapasya. After this, the great religious king Maharaj Yudhishthira executed the royal power in the kingdom strictly according to the codes and royal principles approved by his uncle and confirmed by Lord Sri Krishna. Thus ends the chapter 9, the passing of Bhishma Dev. So it is one of the most inspirational chapters ever in terms of instructional, practical instructions, in terms of demonstrated instructions, in terms of someone who has been very involved in this world, but who has a wonderful, wonderful, successful graduation. This is the graduation ceremony. There's a description of the graduation ceremony. So I'll stop here and see if you have any questions. We've gone over quite a bit. I wanted to conclude the chapter. I didn't want to leave it for the following week so that we could continue the next chapter. So if you have any questions, maybe we can take a couple of questions.
Hare Krishna, bro.
Yes, Hare Krishna.
Actually, unfortunately, I have several questions, but I don't think we can make it today. It's already.
You could put it on. You can put it on chat, Ravi. But let's see. Let's try and see if you can handle those questions. Just wanted to ask me then.
I don't know which one to pick, Prabhu. There are several questions. Okay, suppose you talked about.
Can you speak up a little bit? You're kind of floating in and out.
Yeah. You talked about this Varnashrama Dharma and Stri Dharma and living a disciplined life so that we can prepare for our death always. So out of this, suppose materialistic people also going through so many severe austerities, like the examples you gave, like Guru Maharaj taking one-time food and sleeping only 4 hours. And the materialist, that's what I'm observing here, like great successful politicians and industrialists, these people also talk about this, like they sleep only 3 hours, 4 hours, and they work hard, all that. So how to understand this, bro? Like,
see, but we have to learn to appreciate whatever good is being offered by anyone in this world. If there is someone who is a politician, you know, for example, you have politicians who sleep very few hours. Some of them are quite sincere. They sleep very few hours. They're trying to work and trying to assist and doing their jobs. The point we're trying to make is we want to take that as an example that if you can do that simply to attain a material condition or an improve on a material condition, what about working like that for the purpose of attaining a circumstance which is eternal? So we want to take the precept, we want to take the essence of the teaching rather than look at who is giving us that lesson. This is shown in the Srimad Bhagavatam several times. Number one, during Dhruva Charita, the 2 wives of King Uttanapad, he is very attached to the more beautiful one, the younger one. He is less attached to the mother of Dhruva Maharaj. He ill-treats the mother of Dhruva Maharaj because he is more attached to the other queen. So the Dhruva Maharaj, when he reaches his stepmother and says he wants to sit on the lap of his father, the stepmother says, if you want to sit on the lap of your father, you have to come into my womb, become my son, then you can sit on your lap of the father, which essentially means she was so envious that she told Dhruva Maharaj, you must die. She said, you must die and then take birth in my womb, and then you can sit on your father's lap. Then he goes on further to say, what else can I do? And she says, for that to happen, you have to worship Vishnu. You have to call upon the names of Vishnu. So he runs to his biological mother. Now, this instruction of worshipping Vishnu has come from his stepmother, who is evil, who is envious. He takes this instruction and goes to his and says that my stepmother has told me that I must basically worship Vishnu. I must call upon the names of Vishnu for me to develop the rights to engage with my father. His mother, who is a great devotee, does not disagree, even though this instruction comes from someone who is very envious. She says, yes, your stepmother is right. We should worship Lord Vishnu because he is the source of all opulences. So the point being that when a good instruction comes, even from someone who is of a lesser nature, we should have the humility to accept that good instruction because it's helpful for us. So very hard work for material success means such a person, if he is given Krishna consciousness, will work very hard for Krishna consciousness. So it's good to find such devotees too. To be honest, if you have a very hardworking devotee, a hardworking soul who is very hard working and very focused in the material world, if you can give him Krishna conscious, he'll continue doing the same when he becomes Krishna conscious. It's good to have such people around. So to answer your question, that's how you should understand it.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. I will move to next question. What is the cause of degradation of Brahmanas, Prabhu? Because you said because of degradation of Brahmanas, the next levels, everything got collapsed one after one. Like they're not giving good instruction to the Kshatriyas and so forth, like Vaishyas and then Sudras, everybody not sticking to the Dharma. So first of all, why Brahmanas degraded? Where it started?
The degradation of the Brahmanas is because they lost faith in the process that was given to them. They lost their ability to perform austerities. When a Brahmana loses independence, then he or she can't give instructions. That's what happened. They became more eager to make their life easy. So overall, society used to be such that the Brahmana used to perform great austerities. This austerity used to allow the Brahmana to accumulate a lot of subtle wealth. Then he will meet the king. The moment the king sees the Brahmana, the king will give the Brahmana an entire village. He would give him cows. He would give him whatever he requires, because even the king knew that he was not being given anything which didn't belong to the Brahmana. The Brahmana was receiving whatever belonged to him. He had already accumulated those riches by his austerities. Those austerities are blessings which the king requires to run the kingdom well. So the Brahmana used to be given charity, and then the Brahmana used to give blessings in the form of resources to the king. Then the king could run his kingdom wonderfully, because the king doesn't have time to perform austerities. The Brahmana has time to perform austerities. The Brahmana has accumulated blessings. Those blessings can be given to the king, and the king compensates and makes the Brahmana's life worry-free so that the Brahmana continues in his austerities. This system basically was broken because the Brahmana stopped performing austerities, and as a consequence, they lost spiritual prowess. And because they lost spiritual prowess, they became dependent on the lower classes for maintenance. We see that today. And as a consequence, because they're dependent on the lower classes for maintenance, they take karmic reactions from the lower classes. And as a consequence, their own ability to read Shastra and to speak Shastra has been highly diminished. So what use will they be when they themselves don't have spiritual resources to offer? You see that these days. You see the degradation of the Brahmanas is because they don't know how to maintain themselves by performing austerities. A Brahmana's wealth is austerity. If the Brahmana is able to live simply and has simple desires and is able to perform austerities, and he is able to give the results of his piety as blessings to the other classes, then the other classes themselves prosper with his instructions and his spiritual, association. But nowadays, the Brahmanas are dependent on the other classes for maintenance. So they have become like Shudras. They end up taking karmic reactions. So for example, They come and do this puja, that puja. You go to the mandir for that samskara, this samskara. The brahmana takes the karma of the individual, receives some few pounds or rupees or whatever in compensation. He doesn't have the ability to digest that particular karmic reaction, so he loses his ability to preach. He loses his ability to read. He loses his Brahmanical sense. So the degradation is because the Brahmana is not following his duties. He is not following his nature. They are supposed to go and then live on alms. This is austerity. This is the wealth of the Brahmanas. Then the king is supposed to compensate you. Srimad Bhagavatam. Why is it that the Brahmana is being compensated throughout Srimad Bhagavatam? It is not because the king wants to give, because the king knows that the Brahmana is not doing anything free. The Brahmana basically has accumulated all the wealth through his austerities. He comes and he gives the king blessings. Those blessings are basically simply transformed by the king into material opulences, which he gives the Brahmanas as well. So the point is, the kings and the Vaishyas and the Shudras, they have nothing. It is the Brahmana who has wealth. He is supposed to distribute. But because in the present times, the Brahmana is not performing austerities and has nothing much to give, he basically is dependent on the Shudras. And if you're dependent on the Shudras, if you're in touch with their money, everything else will be correct.
Yes, Prabhu. One thing I want to bring here, Prabhu. First of all, why should they leave their austerities? Isn't it because of, my understanding is that in India, especially in this Mayavada philosophy influence, is made them confused that they are slowly their next generations, they don't have clarity that Krishna is person and absolute truth is the person. And
see, the philosophical aspects are there. We're talking about Kali Yuga. In Kali Yuga, there will be a degradation overall of all classes. There's complete degradation of activity. There's confusion. So in Kali Yuga, if your population is such that they don't have the ability to receive Vedic knowledge, then Mayavada becomes a course for them. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when Lord Buddha appeared, people were abusing Vedic knowledge for the purpose of sense gratification by having all kinds of things in terms of, engaging in meat eating, etc., etc. Yeah, they were engaging in that. Lord Buddha came and he once and for all, he completely eliminated the influence of the Vedas by decrying the Vedas. He pushed it down. Then he said, first be a human being, then you can pursue Vedic knowledge. He cleared the field. Then it was reintroduced by Shankaracharya, Sripad Shankaracharya, at a basic level. So the Vedic knowledge could be reseeded. Lord Buddha cleansed the habits, and Shankaracharya reintroduced Vedic knowledge. Then the Bhakti movement started. Then you had the three great acharyas, Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, then Nimbarkacharya, the great personalities started appearing. Then there was Lord Chaitanya's appearance. So there is a general, I would say, progression. So the point which we're trying to make is that it is the influence of Kali itself. It is the influence of time, not any one particular aspect. But the point we also want to make here is that we want to ensure that we want to be able to preserve Brahmanical life. For us to preserve Brahmanical life, there has to be some way for being able to maintain such life and to encourage such individuals. Does it make sense? Which is why ISKCON is basically supposed to give shelter to the personalities who are supposed to be Brahmanically inclined so that they could be encouraged to move forward and they could preach and they could travel around. Does it make sense? This is basically how we are trying to reorder everything.
Yes, bro. So you mean in Kali Yuga, the degradation is inevitable?
It's inevitable, yes. But at the same time, it's been made very easy with the introduction of Harinam. Was there someone else who was asking a question? I heard someone else asking a question.
Yes. Myself, Ravindra.
Sorry? Can you speak up? I can't hear you.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, this is Padmavati. Prabhu, I got two questions. This refers to like 933. Why it says that at the end of the translation it says, and may I not desire fruitive results? Why is that? Vaishmadev is like, why is that doubt comes? After all, he is concentrating so much on the Lord. And why that doubt's there?
Okay, I'll give you an example and help you understand that. I spoke about it.
Okay. Oh, did you? Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. Perfectly all right. Don't worry. It means essentially that there needs to be more clarification.
Okay.
Basically, being in touch with material nature is so dangerous. It is so dangerous that even if you were to attain higher levels of consciousness, even if Krishna himself were to be in front of you,
Yeah.
you could end up thinking of things which are less fortunate, having fruitive desires. So that's the reason why he's giving us a warning. He's basically also seeking protection. He's seeking protection from Krishna, saying, Krishna, I can't trust material nature. You are in front of me. You're so glorious. I'm wanting to think of nothing but you, but please protect me so that I don't get bewildered by your nature, by material nature, and start thinking fruitively.
Okay. So basically, can we think it is like it's a warning for us? It's not for Bhishmadev.
It is a warning. No, it is in fact, see, it's a warning for us, yes. And basically, it's this world, this universe is dangerous for everybody. It is dangerous. It is a dangerous place because you are in touch with material nature. Give the example. One can say, give the example of Jaya and Vijaya, the doorkeepers of Vishnu. It was basically, if the doorkeepers of Vishnu could forget Vishnu briefly, even though by his will they could forget Vishnu and they could basically stop the Kumaras from entering, they could do something which the Lord wouldn't want his servants to do, then that is also a cause of them falling from the gates of Vaikuntha back into this particular kingdom, back into the material world. So what I'm trying to say is, this is a dangerous place to be in. It requires a lot of protection, a lot of prayers, and that's why Bhishmadev is basically saying, even if you think you're advanced enough that you can see Krishna right in front of you, please do ask for this protection that you don't have fruitive desires.
Thank you, Prabhu. Prabhu, there's one more question. I don't know how to put this up. Is it really required for us to understand our Varna? Because sometimes when it comes to service, maybe you can't think what is your Varna, but you have to go for the service. Is that clear? Am I asking the right question, Prabhu?
You are. In fact, that indeed is the case. If we have a certain propensity, if you have a distinct propensity, that distinct propensity would come forth and it would dominate every other propensity. Sometimes going along with that propensity is easier than to take up things which go against our nature. If you want to read a verse which is very instructive on that, you should read 8th canto, 2nd chapter, 30th verse. 8 to 30, you should read the purport.
Okay.
Yeah, because there, and the reason I'm saying this is, there, Gajendra, the king of the elephants, he is stuck in water. The crocodile has caught his foot. And it is said in that verse, as each year passed, Gajendra, being in water, being an elephant, being out of his nature, was losing strength. Yeah. On the other hand, the crocodile, being in water, being in nature, according to its nature, was gaining in strength. So Srila Prabhupada is instructing that all the participants in this Krishna conscious movement should work towards becoming physically and mentally and psychologically, spiritually strong and act according to their nature so that they're able to move forward and they become stronger by the day. They don't become weak. So for example, someone whose propensity is to get married, if they go against that propensity because they're afraid of participating in material nature and feeding the family, etc., and they remain brahmacharini, then their mind could be quite weak because they're going against their propensity. Over a long period of time, they could actually weaken their position rather than strengthening this position because they're practically acting against their normal propensities. Yeah, they should be honest enough to think, this is what I need to do for me to be able to protect myself so that I could serve Krishna better. I'm just giving you an example. There's a lot of argument about it. There can be a lot of back and forth, but I'm just giving you a sense of how one could choose the wrong ashram, and it could weaken them in one sense, where they could not really progress well because they're getting very distracted because they are in the wrong side of the fence, so to speak.
Okay.
Because ashram is a vehicle,
Yeah.
varna is a vehicle. So someone with a lot of Brahmanical propensity, if they're given a lot of Shudra work, then they become very weak because they really can't function properly. So these are all examples of being able to work according to our nature. And this has to be understood at the leadership level, because the leadership of a yatra is responsible for collective consciousness. The consciousness of the yatra, the collective consciousness, is the responsibility of the leadership. And it is done basically by the leadership choosing to give different roles to different people based on their nature. As a consequence, they're able to fulfill their demands nicely, and they're able to thrive in their Krishna consciousness. So there are different ways to look at it. I was just wanted to give you a broad example.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Prabhu, but
Sure.
sometimes somebody might have mixed qualities, like they can be, it's kind of like an all-rounder. What do you think about that? Why it is like that? Then how can we understand what I'm good at, really?
Basically, what we do is, to be honest, I'm going to give you a more honest reply to this question.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
One never really understands what is going to please Krishna unless they're sincere chanters of the holy names.
Okay.
Until we become very sincere chanters of the holy names, we would not be properly established as servants of Krishna in our heart. We would be acting according to the propensities that we have gained from our previous existence.
Yes.
So the point I'm trying to make is, what really matters is a focus on Panchanga Bhakti so that we establish ourselves in a proper identity of being servants of Krishna. Once we understand that we are servants, then we know how to serve nicely.
Okay.
Then we don't have an issue about what to do and what not to do. Then we become a proper servant. Until we become a proper servant, we are acting according to our propensities. We are constantly acting according to our propensities. We are basically wanting to fulfill demands and things which are based on our nature. So until such time, it is more of an inefficient process because we ourselves are not clean within. Yeah, we are struggling.
Oh,
That's what this is.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. That was nice. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else?
Yes, Prabhu, I still have questions. Maybe I can post in the group.
You can post. If you have one more question, I can take one more question. Unless I just want to make sure I can give opportunities to others as well. So is there anybody else who wants to ask, or should I?
Yeah, Prabhu, I would
Yes.
have a question. Prabhu, Prabhuji, my name is Natalie.
Oh, sure, Natalie. Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So we always talk about like Vaishnava Aprad. It's a big offense, that thing. I really want to understand because like when we are in our congregation, lot of time, not only in congregation but outside also, like when we go to Menor or something, so they are Vaishnava, but sometimes like they behave sometimes in a rude way or something. Like I'm not trying to judge them, but I'm just trying to know like what, like, because the qualities what we read, what we have learned like about Vaishnavas, that is like quite opposite like what we see. So is then in case if we say something to them, or not back answer, but in a nice way also, if we try to say something them or talk about them, is that really a Vaishnava Aprad committed by us then?
Yeah, see, 2 points. We first, in any environment, we first need to understand hierarchy to some extent. Hierarchy as in, if you find that someone is senior to you and you find that their behavior is not on par with Shastric conclusions, it is important for us to reach out to someone who is their senior or their peer, who is known to us, so that we could communicate this and they could discuss it with them, to say that your behavior is affecting the lives of other devotees. we should generally, it is not recommended that we approach someone who is senior and correct them, because it would never be taken well. And I'll explain this. It is an important fact given by our acharyas that unless you are playing the role of a siksha or a diksha guru to someone, normally people don't take instructions from others easily. So it is important for us to understand that we don't want to give instructions openly where someone could just flout them, they could disregard them. We don't want to do that, so we need to find a proper relationship to relate to them. So if we find that someone senior to us is not behaving well, and according to principles of Shastra, they are being rude, they are disregarding principles of being a proper Vaishnava, etc., it is proper for you to approach authorities who are above them or on their level, so that you could discuss it, so they could kind of have a discussion with them rather than confronting them. That will be my advice. And I'm not saying that this doesn't happen, to be honest. It can surely happen. There can be bad behavior in our temples. There can be bad behavior in our yatra. There can be bad behavior seen amongst those who apparently have put in many, many years in the movement. So I'm not going to dismiss any of those possibilities. I'm merely saying that there's a protocol that you need to follow to protect yourself, so that you don't go and get into trouble with someone who's senior to you, because that person, even though their behavior is unpleasant, could be putting in many, many more hours of service, etc., and they could be passing through a phase which is making them behave in a bad way. So it's better for their seniors to deal with that. Does it make sense?
Yeah, but generally I just ignore it. If anybody says anything to me, I ignore it. I mean, I said discussing means not discussing with them. I mean, if I talk that with my husband or some of our close friends, so is that, because again I'm talking about a Vaishnav to someone, so is that offense again? Like, that's what I mean.
Okay, very carefully. If you want to discuss another Vaishnav's behavior, the only time you should discuss it is wanting to serve them in the mood of service.
Okay.
Not as a matter of criticism, saying, look at this guy, you know, he's senior, or he has done so many things and he seems to behave in such a manner. Now, when you make a casual remark of that kind, it doesn't help your spirituality. So that's the point I'm trying to make, is that any interaction that we have with the Vaishnava community, if you can buffer it and manage it through service, you would find that you're doing a lot better.
Okay.
Yeah, so find out how you can serve that person. Someone senior could do bad things. I'm not going to be in denial, but what you should do is not discuss it with everybody. You can surely discuss it with your husband. You can surely discuss it with your mentors, and then ask them for advice or tell them how to process this. This is perfectly fine, but not casual discussions.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yes.
Just like a continuation to that, the incident the Mataji was explaining. In case that if we go to the seniors, like senior, and say this is what happened, and if senior also doesn't seem to be understanding or takes that side or whatever, and says no, okay, forget about it. Why are you bothered about it? Because that may be a misunderstanding. So actually you're asking because in the future, as you say, it may be difficult to do service together, because when there is no trust, serving together, it becomes very, very difficult. And but your question has not been answered, you feel. So what is the situation of that person? If the person wants to understand, because how am I going to deal with this in future? So, and the person says, forget about it. Why are you bothered about it? Don't forget about it. This is another time. So, but if that is keep on happening, what will we do?
Then, well, basically two options. Number one is based on what we have seen people do in our movement before in terms of our mentors, our seniors.
Yeah.
What you should do is obviously approach authorities who can listen to you. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
That's the only criterion that is left now.
Yeah.
You know, what I'm saying is, if it bothers you because nobody is doing anything, go to the authorities. And if you say that someone who is an authority is not listening, go to his authority or her authority. There's nothing wrong with that. The point I'm trying to make is it should be dealt with in the mood of service. Otherwise, we carry the burden of this bad behavior in our hearts. That's the point.
True. But isn't it good that you just get away and find another way to serve? I don't know whether it is the right question, but because sometimes you find it's so difficult, it's like banging your head on a wall. It's rather
True.
you find your better way. You can work with someone, because
That's an
even
option.
my spiritual master, His Holiness Japataka Maharaj, was on the other day. He was explaining, if you find difficult with somebody, it's better you find someone who you can work with, rather getting into doing aparadh, like criticism.
Exactly.
Aparadh.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. If it gets to a point where it doesn't work out at all and there's just constant friction,
Yes.
then it is just better to find a different opportunity. See, there are two ways to understand this. One, when you're going through these experiences, never forget that Krishna is involved.
Very true.
No experience in this movement is minus Krishna, because it is his environment.
Yes.
There's something in it for us as well. There's something very instructive in this as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so we should never forget that fact.
Yeah.
I would suggest that if there is a circumstance where you really repeatedly are not able to serve because of politics, then because of someone's behavior, then withdrawing from that environment and then applying your energy and your time and your service elsewhere is definitely recommended. But I would also like to remind you that every environment has its own complexity.
Yes, that's true. Thank you. Yeah.
So every
Yeah.
environment practically. So you can't really run away from one to the other. So it's better to resolve it, to try and resolve it.
Yeah.
So better to go to the authorities, talk to them, but sometimes it can be very complex. So we may simply want to walk away, as your Guru Maharaj talked about, and it might help as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. But sometimes, Prabhu, there's another thing. Even even if you have an event or something, we say, okay, what's the feedback? Okay. So always, I do not know why, I've seen devotees like all good feedbacks. The moment you really, with the right interest, if you give a feedback, oh, no, she said that, she said that. Oh, you totally, in a corporate level, people really pay to get the feedbacks. But in us, if you say a right thing in a very right way, but still that feedback won't be considered in the right way. What do you have to say? Like, do you want to say something about it? Why like this?
Well, basically, it's unfortunate if feedback is not collected. The reason is because it's an environment where there is little trust.
Yes.
So because there's a lack of trust, anything which is being said, which is even negative or has negative connotations or is seen as a severe criticism. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's
So
true.
then there has to be a different approach. There has to be a greater level of communication so that people develop a deeper level of trust. Then slowly, steadily, feedback can be given. Or we have to find someone who can offer feedback and who will not be taken offensively. And such a person can very tactfully introduce the feedback in a very constructive way.
Okay. Yeah, on the other day, Vishambara Prabhu, he mentioned a comment in the Bhagavatam class. We have to go out to the world and to find their good qualities. It's not thinking that, oh, we are devotees, we know everything, we know everything, they know nothing, they don't have any good qualities, only we have everything. So we are the super people. But sometimes when you go out, there are so many good qualities we can really bring in. So we have to really go out with that heart also. What good qualities he was explaining. So I thought,
well, we want to be humble enough to understand that we basically are carriers of Lord Nityananda's mercy when we step out.
yes.
However, we should be careful in thinking that a very efficient, good, sober, materialist is better than an obnoxious chanter of the holy names.
No, yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
understand what I said now?
Yes, Prabhu.
Because there's a temptation. There's a temptation sometimes to
Yeah.
think that the karmis are better than the devotees because the karmis behave so nicely. Their
Yeah.
behavior is good. They treat us better. These
Yeah.
guys are supposed to be devotees, but they seem to be not even knowing the basic etiquette of interacting, which the
Yeah.
others who are not cultured in devotional service seem to know. But
Yes.
there's a risk there. I agree that sometimes these things can come up, but there's a risk because shastrically, our acharyas are saying
Yeah.
a chanter of the holy names with bad qualities is sooner or later going to give up those bad qualities because of the power of Harinam.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as a consequence, his service and his presence in our lives would be quite glorious. The same cannot be said about an extraordinarily well-behaved, non-Krishna conscious person whose behavior and whose softness and whose etiquette and whose skills in communication are very, very good. And he's very cultured, but he does not know Krishna. So you can never make that comparison. So the point which I'm trying to make is there are wonderful things that the world can teach us. We have to have a heart which is humble enough to be able to see the good qualities of others so that we could encourage them and they could contribute to our growth and we could give them Krishna, which is most important for their growth. But at the same time, we should never get into the mindset of thinking that a materialistic person who doesn't chant, even though he shows good qualities externally, is better than a devotee whose behavior is bad, but who seems to be sitting there in Mangalarti, holding on to the beads every day. Because sooner or later, this devotee who's sitting in Mangalarti, holding on to the beads, is going to change because of Harinam, and he is going to contribute. So I was just wanting to say that we should be careful about jumping to conclusions about the nature of those who chant versus those who don't. It is good to take qualities from the world, which is absolutely right. There's no doubt about it. But always keep in mind that we should never think that they are better than us in certain ways. Not in a very arrogant way, but more from the perspective. Because they could be very cultured, they could be wonderful, they could be very sweet. And you find this sometimes in relatives, you find this in so many different people. But if they reject Krishna, then they basically don't have the same standing as someone who has accepted Krishna. Does it make sense?
Of course, Prabhu. Whoever reject Krishna, no way they can be good.
So I was
at
just
least-
wanting to say, yeah.
If they don't know about Krishna, that's a different thing. But knowingly, they know Krishna, but still they don't want to think that he's a supreme person. So that is not right at all. Yeah. Thank you very much, Prabhu. Yeah.
Sure.
Got it. Thanks a lot. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. This is
Hare Krishna.
I'd like to ask a question which actually relates to the previous question. I want to know more about offences when devotees get misunderstood by other devotees and they feel offended. Does that mean that we've caused that offence, even though that we didn't mean to cause the offence?
I can answer this. Basically, in a Krishna conscious environment, the environment itself is quite dynamic in the sense that there are many opportunities for us to grow out of the environment in a wonderful way, from a Krishna conscious way. So in other words, there are certain things that would happen in an environment which is dynamic. There might be incidents, there could be dialogues, there could be interactions, which are all opportunities for growth. And in that environment, sometimes you also have apparent challenges where there can be disagreements, there can be certain levels of, I would say, some level, I would say, of disagreement to the point where we may even not want to have anything to do with the personality, etc., because of the disagreements, etc. But ultimately, all of this is a matter of consciousness, and this appears simply for us to be able to grow out of it. The point I want to make here is that we need to focus on the mood of service and the mood of wanting to grow. If we focus on the mood of service before we enter into a temple environment, then what would happen is that we would see each interaction as an opportunity for service. This would also give us insight on how to serve, even if we find someone speaking apparently in a manner which is disagreeable to us. So what to say to such a person, how to interact with that person, what to do and what not to do. All of this becomes very straightforward if our mood is of service. On the other hand, if we go into an environment which is dynamic, which is Krishna conscious, where we have an attitude of wanting to correct others, because we have that attitude outside in the world, we see people making mistakes. As a consequence, we pick people's faults. We discriminate quite heavily. So we go in with the same attitude because it's natural. Whatever we are outside, we also bring it inside the home. We bring it inside the devotional environment. Then the mood services, then we can only see faults, and then we lose the strategy and the ability to interact with those faults. Because the strategy and the ability to interact with those faults has to come in from Krishna, from the super soul who is sitting inside. He would give us the intelligence. He says this in the Bhagavad Gita in 10:10. I will give you insight for you to be able to come to me. So this insight is going to be given by Krishna himself, but we need to set ourselves up just before we enter into the environment, become meditative, knowing fully well that you're entering into a classroom. Every interaction is going to be an opportunity for growth. And if you enter with that mindset of wanting to serve and also wanting to learn, then what happens is each and every interaction, regardless of how it is presented, becomes an opportunity for service. I would like to give you an example of a devotee. She was a Prabhupada disciple, an extraordinary devotee, very, very advanced, very advanced. This devotee, Mother Hladini, she basically had an attitude of how to process the environment, which is very, very valuable for us. You should read about it. Her name was Hladini, Hladini, a Prabhupada disciple. And there are books written about her because she was so good. So she gives an example while serving in Columbus, in Ohio, in the Ohio temple in Columbus, where she was serving in the kitchen, and there was a manager in the temple who was quite obnoxious, who walked into the kitchen and started yelling at her, saying, "Why is the garbage bin full? Why isn't the garbage being taken out as yet? Why is the garbage flowing out?" etc., etc. Started yelling at her. Now, there were two options, two opportunities for her. One was to completely reject that behavior and become resentful and rejecting the atmosphere as being non-fruitful and completely taking that atmosphere as being non-useful for her Krishna conscious growth. The other opportunity that she had was to transform that experience as being a dynamic environmental opportunity for her to grow out of. So she processed that entire instruction of the devotee coming in and yelling and saying the garbage bins are full by saying that Krishna wants me to take out the garbage. Her processing of that entire incident was very simple. It was a one-liner. Krishna wants me to take out the garbage. It's as simple as that. So if someone is ready to interact in an environment such as this, then they're slowly, steadily giving up any sense of identity which they have, which is other than being Krishna's servant. And in a dynamic environment, all of these opportunities become useful for us to be able to move forward. So I hope this answers your question. So there can be opportunities to learn from, and there can be opportunities to help others, and we should know both. We should always be in the mood of wanting to learn from these opportunities. If our hearts are open to learn, lessons will be given. And we should also try to assist those who are not doing what they're supposed to do by very humbly going to their superiors and discussing this, telling them that I saw this and I was upset about it. I didn't know what to do. I'm just bringing it to your attention. What would you like to do about it? Now, if this is interrupting your service to such an extent that you want to leave the group, etc., this requires even deeper discussions, and you should seek such discussions with those whom you have confidence in. This is very important to have. So I'm saying this requires a lot of discussion, but the fundamental attitude is the attitude of service and understanding that Krishna consciousness is dynamic. When we enter into an environment, we can expect everything to happen. We would learn from it. We would dismiss, we would basically learn from all of these environments. That's what we need to understand as well. I hope this helps you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribo?
Haribo. You mentioned that the mind has to practice withdrawing. How does one practice this? What is the best way of practicing this?
The mind's withdrawal is practiced while we chant the holy names over a certain period of time. Over a certain period of time, as we become more and more purified by coming in Harinam service, our mind would become less and less active and would fall in line. This is done through several ways. The first being regular chanting, waking up at the same time, sitting in the same spot, using perhaps the same cushions, using, facing the same wall in some cases. When you start bringing in consistent patterns of wanting to chant the holy names, the mind becomes passive. And as the mind becomes pacified over a period of time, there's purification, and then you're able to, you're able to grab the mind. You're able to grab the mind with using your intellect, knowing fully well that the mind is basically weak. It gets dragged around here and there by the senses. So you grab it using your intellect and you allow it to focus.
Oh, thank you very much. So basically, subduing the mind with that, so it doesn't have the stimulus affecting it as much as
subduing the mind and constantly the underlying statement was focus on chanting, because the chanting process and what you do with the mind during chanting would automatically give you control over the mind. It is chanting that is going to give you the power to do so.
Okay, yes, so improve chanting.
Exactly, improve chanting, and you would automatically find that you have better faculties over the mind.
Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, any one last question before I go?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. It's Pratyush here.
Yes, Pratyush. Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, I mean, when, as you suggested that in a positive way, when we discuss it with senior devotees, the faults of someone we see that he should improve in a positive sense. But how to maintain that very fine line that we don't see it to our personal benefit, basically, or as a part of criticism or somehow, because the past time, what I remember, when the Rahu and Ketu, when the demon entered into the queue, it was Sun and Moon who took the case to Sri Hari, saying that there are demons in the queue while receiving the Amrit. Although it was the right thing to do, but as a part of that appeal that was made, they were also subjugated to the eclipse, basically. So they, I mean, it was right thing to do, but somehow they received a part of either karma or whatever. They were also involved in the kind of act that was done at that time. Is it somewhat related? My thought process somewhere.
It is. See, the point is as follows. If you're comparing basically that if you're saying that the sun and the moon, Surya and Chandra, the demigods, because they found fault, they had the ability to discriminate. The enmity caused by such discrimination is basically causing an eclipse of the sun and the moon. Are you saying basically? Are you referring to that overall?
Yes, somehow, basically, yes. I mean,
yeah. See, yeah, but I think there's an easier way to deal with this. The easier way is as follows. And this is based on this is based on my experience, actually. My experience is that in Krishna consciousness, when you are in and out of environments, dealing with different devotees at different times of your Krishna conscious career, so to speak, it's a dynamic environment. You are going to learn from it. And to learn from it, you're going to have certain intense experiences. Those intense experiences may not be fully understood by us at that time. It could hurt us. It could soften our heart. It could make us, sometimes people could just cry. Grown men could cry. People could cry. This is the point I'm just trying to make is, if the mood is to learn from such an environment, and if the devotee is sincerely chanting and sincerely wanting to learn, they would come out of such an experience after a few days of actually learning from it. And I have seen this multiple times, over many, many years of, interactions. I have found that some things which you can possibly ignore would be extraordinarily amplified in Krishna consciousness just for our benefit. We would start thinking that it's so painful, but someone else can't see the same thing because this is for our benefit. And then we have to grow over it. We have to understand what we need to do. And then we would need to be able to move forward, So I don't want to explain the circumstances, but I remember once when I was very badly hurt in the early days. I'm talking about when I first got initiated. I remember being very badly hurt by another devotee in the temple who criticized me openly to my face. And I took the problem to my spiritual master. He just laughed. So I remember that. The point I'm just trying to make is, he just laughed and said that you have to basically focus on growing from it, understanding it. If that devotee said that you are not doing what you're supposed to do, then focus on that particular fact. Just focus on that fact, and you'll grow out of it. So the point is that it is a dynamic environment. Certain things can make us weep, but in reality, if our mood is to serve, and if our mood is to grow out of it, you will suddenly find a lot of insight coming from that experience, and you would become much better. So a lot of help would be made available. It's a matter of how we process that. So that's the point I was wanting to convey. You can't eliminate these experiences. I'm being very honest. You can't shut people up. You can't eliminate these experiences as you're growing in Krishna consciousness. You can't simply say that these things will not and should not happen. It's the part of an environment. It's a matter of how we can grow out of it. So we need to have certain internal principles on how to deal with this, but there are external factors on how to deal with it as well. Internally, accept it as a lesson because Krishna is wanting you to grow out of it in certain ways. Externally, communicate what you need to do to higher ups. This communication has to be up, and some environments can be very complex, as some of the devotees were talking about. These are environments where there's very little trust. When people can't take feedback, they feel insulted, they feel that people are coming after them. These are all environments of poor trust. So which essentially means that there has to be some trust building exercise which has to happen, where there has to be greater communication, greater involvement in service. But these are external factors. How you're going to process it is an internal factor. Because if you don't know how to process this event and you leave the movement because someone has insulted you, then that is your fault. It is your loss. So as a consequence, I'm saying there has to be a dynamic understanding that yes, there would be certain complexity. Yes, a group of people have come about in an environment where people are learning, people are growing. They are going to misbehave at times. I need to figure out how to process all of this so that I can stay in the game. How do you process all of this? It starts with your chanting in the morning. It starts with a meditation of wanting to serve, and then stepping aside and allowing Krishna, who is within our hearts, to dictate to us that this experience is supposed to teach you this. This experience is supposed to teach you that. Go back to the example I gave. The lady who was in the hospital, who was a pujari, her internal consciousness transformed the external hospital room. So what we are inside can have an effect on the outside. So practice that first, and then you would find that you can fit into any environment. Changing the temple is not an excuse because every temple has its complexity. Every temple practically on the planet has its complexity because more or less you will find challenges of a similar nature, not same, similar. So it's better to know how to process it. It is better to seek help. It is better to find out how it was done elsewhere because someone else has already solved this problem in a dynamic environment. But most important, try to figure out how to fix it in your heart so that you don't feel discouraged. Because if you feel discouraged in your heart, then you are losing out. So that's more important. That's the fact I want to just convey in this. Because I'm trying to assist you with individual consciousness. Collective consciousness, where challenges are occurring in a dynamic temple environment, that is a responsibility of temple leadership. I'm trying to assist you with individual consciousness. I'm trying to tell you that yes, life can be challenging. Yes, you can come across devotees who can misbehave. Yes, there can be other problems which can come across, which can be very discouraging. How do you deal with it internally? Because you need to survive that. You need to stick around because you're in a dynamic learning process. Never forget that all of this is happening under Krishna's eyes. It doesn't mean he's wanting it, but he's involved anyways. Never forget it. So that's more important for us to realize. I hope that's clear, Pratyush.
Yeah, Prabhuji. Yep. And I just want to, I went to a lecture from Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu. He actually put on 4 quadruples and the situations, different situations, how to deal with it. And somehow, and the different situations were there. One of the situation when he said that if you don't do, as you said as well, if you can't help a person by discussing that incident to someone, don't discuss it. It's something which is, which you as well said, and I was like, okay, fine. Yeah, that could be a. I try to follow that process. That if I can't help someone by discussing this thing, I just try to digest that internally, as you said, rather than externally. And I never got into situation by Krishna's grace, basically, to get into that situation where I had to ever think of like discussing it with anyone else of any of the situation. But that's what I took from there, basically.
Sure.
And that is what. And then there are a lot many other incidents which confuse me basically what to do. And one of the incident I told you, like Surya and Chandra, Suryaji and Chandraji's incident, where they try to do better for everyone else, but they were also involved somehow, partaking some part of the thing what they did. Basically, they did it for good. They wouldn't have done it.
It's a good example. It's a good example. Because basically, they intervened overall for the benefit, but they're also paying the price for the intervention in some way or the other.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good example.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's really helpful. Basically, I mean, understanding the fact that internal processing and external processing both are important. If you can't
Internal processing is what we need to focus on, because you have control over how you process life. You have control over how you process life. You don't have control over someone else's behavior. You don't. You have control over how you're going to be able to process it. Doesn't mean you're going to put up with nonsense. It doesn't mean that. It's more a matter of you being able to process it properly so that it doesn't throw you out of Krishna consciousness. Because sometimes people just get so upset with certain aspects of being a part of the community that they leave the community. And that is never helpful, because you can't grow. You need to interact for you to grow.
There's other thing I was just thinking while discussing with you, basically, on that being a devotee. I mean, as being aspiring to be a devotee. I mean, a devotee has to transcend 3 modes of nature. I mean, first tamas, rajo, and then ultimately when situated in satya, we have to transcend as well, satya as well, satya gun as well. So the only understanding that will help us transcend is being understanding, as you already mentioned, Prabhuji, is that being servant of the servants, dasanudas, and understanding is that if anybody is trying to speak harshly or trying not to do good, being in a community, we are still following the principles, being dasanudas of that person as well. And during that, we need to take instructions out of that behavior that might help us as a master trying to instruct something which might be good or bad. We might not be doing in a different way. Obviously, it's not doing in a different pleasing way. But if we could follow a mentality that I'm still a das of that person, somehow following the principles of das and das, that might help me understand that what I need to take from that situation.
Sure. See, the point being very clearly that there are multiple ways to resolve all of this, but all of these are an opportunity for growth. Just keep that in mind. And at the same time, we don't need to ignore all of this because it can become cancerous, it can grow, and the community can get ruined by constant occurrences. So there's a need to speak about it. So I'm not encouraging silence, I'm encouraging processing, and I'm encouraging intelligent ways to access different people who can help you. So sometimes it would just be wise to find a proper higher level authority who has commonality, who can speak to it. If that's not working out, bide your time, tolerate your circumstances. There's so many different things that can be done. And the more austere your service, you would gain more. Not wishing to say that life should be difficult, but just wanting to say, that's also a fact. Okay? Anything else? Anybody else?
And probably last but not least, just pray for everyone else, so that it's all good in talking, but when we get into those situations, we should be able to follow the teachings and the learnings what we have. That is more important, because when it practices, then we are not able to do it until we are blessed to
sure.
get it.
Will do. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, so we'll end the session today. Thank you for engaging me in your service and Prabhupada's service. So we'll meet again the following week. We'll be continuing chapter 10 and we'll progress further. And I hope this works out well for you in terms of your journey as well. Thank you so much. Srila Prabhupada.